Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for December 5th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this episode. I apologize if Brendan has been showing up in your dreams, causing
I
you
don't.
havoc and nightmares.
I don't. I'll take the fame. I'll take the glory.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I feel like that's going to happen now. Everyone that's listening to this, we have manifested it, and you can expect Brendan to just show up.
I just hope I'm not standing there awkwardly doing nothing to help or intervene people. I like to think I'm a little bit more sincere than that.
Yeah, that is interesting. We'll talk about that further as we're, of course, talking Dream Scenario starring Nicolas Cage in this episode. It's interesting because I do remember this film coming up at the beginning of the year when we were doing our most anticipated of the year because, and I don't know if at the time this was still happening, if it changed this year. I'm honestly not sure, but at the time, and again, this was early January, I did read that Ari Aster was tapped to direct this movie. He, of course, did not.
No.
I don't know when that shifted, when that changed. But we could have had an Ari Aster's version of this film.
With Adam Sandler, apparently.
With Adam Sandler. Yeah, not even Nicolas Cage.
No. And you know, I'm actually not surprised to hear that piece of trivia because the general premise here actually does seem to fit pretty nicely within Ari Aster's wheelhouse. I feel like he could do some interesting things with it. And maybe we'll talk about that indirectly as we get to our opening thoughts on the film that we actually got. But I will say, as hit or miss as I tend to be with Ari Aster in general, I think he would have been a pretty interesting choice for this material.
It would have. Absolutely. Yeah. I think he would have done some really interesting things for sure. But alas, Ari Aster is just a producer here. So, Dream Scenario. It is written and directed by Christopher Borgli instead. Yeah. And it stars Nicolas Cage, Julian Nicholson, Michael Cera, Tim Meadows, among others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Dream Scenario, it is about a hapless family man who finds his life turned upside down when millions of strangers suddenly start seeing him in their dreams when his nighttime appearances take a nightmarish turn. Paul is forced to navigate his newfound stardom. Okay, Brendan, what did you think about Dream Scenario?
Well, hopefully I find my newfound stardom when people start dreaming about me, as you talked about in the opening
they
there.
Should. Absolutely.
I want to note that I just got back from seeing this movie maybe a few hours ago.
Okay.
So I'm coming into this conversation very fresh, and I was really worried about that because given that concept that you just laid out there, this is a very high concept movie, right? I was really thinking and prepared for this is going to be dangerous territory for me because am I going to be going into this review blind without any proper notes? And this is not the kind of movie to have that lack of preparation for.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I'm okay without the notes on this one. This is, I'm having a battle with my head and my heart here because I will say I did like this movie. I enjoyed it overall, but I do think this is another one of those examples where a high concept is really not heavily as utilized as it should be. I think this is kind of lost potential in some ways. And mostly it's because of how on the nose some of its allegories are at the start. We get this opening lecture on zebras. I'll simply say vaguely, right?
Yep.
It is so on the nose, it might as well be a plot point, right? I mean, it more or less describes the entire movie. Like it basically gives beginning, middle, and end. What's going to happen here? So there's very little room for thematic or even narrative surprise. Now, it does get a little bit surprising when those dreams do take a nightmarish turn. So I do think there are some sequences there that are at least pretty effective. And of course, you have Nicolas Cage, who is just always fun to watch.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if it weren't for Nicolas Cage front and center, would this movie have worked for me at all? And I'm not sure if it would have. I think it's a fascinating concept that isn't as heavily tapped into as it should be. You basically have two very clear directions that this movie wants to go in. On one hand, the story of someone who really wants to find any way, shape, or form to gain attention and fame without really doing the work for it, which is something we've seen many times. The film seems to be more interested in that than it is how this man's insecurities and thoughts are so powerful that they're literally invading the dreams of other people. So it seems less interested in that, and that's the aspect I actually found more provocative, if I'm being honest. But it seems to be more interested in the fame and stardom angle and the consequences of that more than anything else. Which I think it plays those cards too early. This is kind of one of those films that plays those thematic cards within the first third and has places to go narratively, but not necessarily morally, if that makes sense. So I definitely enjoyed the film, just given that fascinating concept and the Nicolas Cage of it all. But I was left a little bit disappointed, primarily because I don't think the concept is fully realized by the end, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And once again, I think we are on the same page here.
Wow.
I'm equally
same
coming
brain,
into
baby.
this-
Same brain.
I know. Too often that happens. Equally, I'm coming into this a little blind. I didn't just see the movie, but I'm not too far removed, and I also don't have much prepared here, as much as I would have liked to. But I did see the film. I did enjoy it, and I think I find myself frustrated really for a lot of the same reasons. I love this concept. I think
I agree.
there's
Yeah.
a lot about it that's intriguing. And I think Nicolas Cage is really great here in how he taps into this concept. I love the gag that all of these people, whether they be familiar to him or complete strangers, they start seeing him in his dreams. And he is not weirded out by that. What he is concerned about is the fact that in all of these dreams, he's just standing there. He's not doing anything to help these people who find themselves in peril. And he is almost offended that these people just see him. Like he's not doing anything to help.
That's where his insecurities come into play and how powerful that they are, that they're feeding into other people's dreams as opposed to just his own.
Absolutely.
That passivity in him is something that clearly bothers him. And this is fueling that even further.
I completely agree. And I think when it comes to the concept, it's a little bit of subjective and objective for me. I think you're right in the sense that even the concept as it is and what it's trying to do, I don't think it fully gets there in the end.
Yeah.
But on a subjective level, I find myself torn because this concept is so fascinating that I would have loved to see it go in a very different direction. Instead, what it's primarily used for is a mechanism for the film to explore the fickle nature of pop culture. And look, I think that on its own is an interesting idea because there is a lot of truth to that. And there is absolutely no doubt, without hesitation, that if this was to manifest in our world, in real life, that whoever we are seeing in our dreams, you better goddamn believe it, Sprite is going to try to get in on it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, of course, they're going to try to corporatize it. They're going to try to make money off of it. And I understand why the film wants to create something so absurd in order to comment on the hollow nature of corporate America and pop culture and social media. But I just don't think those two things gel well here. You have something that sets itself up as this fascinating horror movie that then turns into a simple allegory, I guess, this comedy of sorts that admittedly did make me laugh at times. I just don't think it's seamless in how the film is able to bridge those gaps. And then you have Nicolas Cage, who I think is great, and he's really going for something psychologically with his character of Paul.
Yeah.
And that also feels disconnected from what the filmmakers are trying to do here in terms of telling this comedic-ish allegory. So it just feels a little disjointed on the whole. I think it's a good time. I enjoyed myself. I'm glad I saw it. But
Same.
I just, it doesn't quite reach the heights that I was hoping for.
And it sounds like you and I were more interested in this other idea of a man who has found himself kind of hiding within the herd and not making himself seen or known as that central zebra allegory portrays itself. It's very on the nose, but seeing how a man like that, who is battling very deep rooted insecurities, and that's the reason why he wants to stay kind of passive and hidden, right? And when he puts himself out there, he feels like he's in danger, right? That idea, I think, is more interesting, and how those insecurities are so powerful, they're manifesting themselves in other people's dreams. Like,
Which is interesting too. Sorry to cut you off.
you're good.
But it's interesting because one of those connections, so he ends up having a conversation early on with the film with a former colleague who is tapped into this high concept in some way. But because of their previous work together, they have a conversation about the work they've done. And the reason that Paul hasn't moved forward with this book that he wants to write is because of those insecurities, putting himself out into the world. And yet later on in the film, without getting into spoilers, there's a reveal where his insecurities end up costing him. In terms of his career pursuits, I'll say vaguely. So it's interesting how those things do merge together. Like, that to me is interesting. I wanted more of that. Like, that to me is where this film is able to have its cake and eat it too. But unfortunately, it's far and few in between.
It's like we said, it's more interested in its notions on how this situation would create a pop culture icon, for better and for worse, right? I think those ideas could have just been confined to that one agency scene in the boardroom with Michael Cera. That's the one scene where you can turn that into a single joke, and that's it. It doesn't need to be in the movie anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I understand how some of the ramifications on fame and celebrity could present themselves, which is why the movie takes the nightmarish turn that it does. But I would have liked to see a little bit more focus on the man himself fueling that violence, as opposed to the fame and celebrity being a major catalyst for it, right?
Exactly.
Another moment in the movie that I actually think does get to something potentially interesting is this short little escapade he has with the Molly character, played by Dylan Galula, I believe her name is. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name right, but to put it very vaguely, it involves a form of role play, I'll simply say, and really gets into this interesting idea on what fantasizing ultimately means, and if there is anything impure about that, especially for someone that is married, sexual fantasies specifically. That's the moment where I also thought, okay, you've introduced a really interesting concept. Now you're trying to progress it a little bit. Now you're trying to move a little bit further with it and say something on top of it. There are layers building here. And then the scene ends. It's like, okay, no, we're done. We're back to fame and fortune now. So it's unfortunately another missed opportunity, but there's something interesting there.
And that's where the film just feels disjointed in its goals. Because I agree, that's another one of those fascinating moments. And I do love that from Molly's perspective, it has nothing to do with pop culture or fame. That's not why she's interested in Paul. She's interested in Paul because of the dreams. And wanting to, as you're saying, role play in a way that would bring her this satisfaction. And the way it unfolds, it's a little subversive. It certainly, I think,
Oh, it's funny.
furthers it is, but and it certainly furthers Paul's own insecurities for sure. And there's a moral dilemma at play in it all simultaneously. That is a great moment. I agree.
I-
But to your point, it is in a vacuum almost because
Mhm.
the aftermath of what we see going forward has very little to do with that moment. And it's
Yeah.
back to the whole pop culture angle of it. So
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I'm glad you brought up the Ari Aster of it all, that he is not just a producer on this, but was once tapped to direct this with Adam Sandler. And I don't know if that would have been a better movie because we obviously never saw that movie. And I like Nicolas Cage in this role. I actually think he's not only great here, he's easily the best thing in this movie. He's really the piece
Yeah.
holding it all together.
yeah.
But I bring
yeah.
I bring that up to say because I'm not too familiar with Christopher Borgli as
Yeah,
a filmmaker.
Yeah.
This is the only film of his I've seen. I know he's done another film. I think it was called Sick of Myself, which
Yeah.
I have not seen.
Yeah.
I think as far as the filmmaking is concerned here, I think it's fine. I think it actually needed someone like an Ari Aster to get a bit weird
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
Like if there is anything weird about it, it mostly comes through in Nicolas Cage's performance. And there are admittedly a few moments when those dreams take nightmarish turns that some of the horror is a little bit effective, but it's still playing with pretty common tropes that we've seen from other horror movies. And that's the thing. The thing about dreams is that they're not really meant to be tropey, right? Your dreams are meant to be a weird manifestation of something internal, and it's meant to be portrayed in an almost abstract way,
Yeah.
and which is why I think the filmmaking here is a little bit too safe, if I'm being honest. And I kind
Yeah.
of would have liked to see a little
Yeah.
bit more of a daring approach there.
I mean, because what is there about the dream sequences that seem to indicate that they're dreams, aside from them telling us that they're
Yeah,
dreams?
well, and I kind of understand why, because it is meant to play with suspense a little bit to trick the audience into not knowing what's a dream and what's real. So I get that, but at the same time, I think it might contradict the point a little bit. Now, I
Yeah.
will say there are moments of pretty clever editing to make use of that. They
Yeah.
are a little bit few and far between, but some of those moments I felt like, okay, this is where it seems like Borgli is playing with form a little bit. I just wish he did that a little bit more often.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, even if the idea, and I don't necessarily disagree with this, the idea that, hey, we want to make this as grounded as possible because it's about the aftermath of what they're seeing in their dreams. Because as they take this nightmarish turn, what we see in people is that they are deathly terrified of
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah.
Deathly terrified, which of course has a nice little irony to it because there's nothing about Paul that is intimidating.
Right. Yeah.
He's actually kind of a nice guy. He's a little egotistical for sure.
Yeah. And he's a
But-
weirdo. He's a weirdo, but
He's
like
a weirdo.
yeah,
He's a bit of a
not
nerd.
threatening. He's not threatening.
Yeah, he's not threatening at all. And yet, when people see him, they recoil vividly, viscerally.
Yeah.
So if the idea of these dreams as they take this nightmarish turn is to make sense of that, then I think you have to go all in on the horror.
I'm with you.
And while, okay, it doesn't have to be ethereal and impressionistic. You can make them grounded, but go all in and depict why people would feel that way. And I think it's too tepid.
Yeah.
The conventionality of it, I'm less concerned with, I guess, and more so the fact that they just don't seem to indicate that fear. It's
Yeah.
I don't think they do enough in that regard. And
Yeah, it's
and
told to us.
Ari Aster, I guess to be fair, like I don't watch an Ari Aster film because he's a grotesque horror filmmaker. So maybe he also wasn't the right guy to do this. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
could
know.
see why he would be very interested in the existential part of this and the concept part of this for sure. But I think to really make let us feel the weight of the fear these people are experiencing, you really needed to go all in. You need to get a Rob Zombie
Well, at the same
really
time,
go full gore here.
yeah, at the same time too, I understand why there is meant to be something practical about these nightmares because it is meant to trick these individuals into thinking that Paul is a threatening figure now,
Yeah.
right? But that's again, this is why having a right director who knows how to strike a balance between two extremes. That's why we always talk about how that's a very tricky thing to do, right? And I think this is a clear example of that tricky high wire act. And honestly, a director like Borgli just not being able to thread that line very well.
Yeah.
And that maybe Ari Aster would have been better suited for that. I don't know. Maybe he would have been too extreme in that. I'm honestly not
Maybe.
too sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there needed to be more creativity on the dream front and the nightmare front, while still maintaining some believability that Paul is someone to be feared in real life now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Exactly. Because,
yeah.
for example, that scene in the gymnasium, I
Mhm.
love what it's aiming for psychologically.
Yeah,
I just don't think it carries the heft it thinks it does.
I'm with you.
Because we don't we're just assuming that based off of these dreams that are vague and not really shown to us, we don't even know what they are. I will give credit to the performances. They certainly do a good job of
Yeah,
recoiling and
yeah.
depicting that fear, but because the film doesn't want to demonstrate it to
Mhm.
us, the only
Yeah.
time we see Paul is it's early on. We get a few that demonstrate that he's just lingering in these dreams, just standing there not doing anything. You get the one of Molly where she has a sexual response to it,
Mhm.
which is compelling for the reasons we talked about. But when it comes to the fear, it dabbles into it, I guess slightly, but I just it's just not there. The
It
execution is
yeah.
a little
And
too
and
prosaic.
and the one time that the film does choose to get a little bit weird, at least narratively speaking, we won't give it away because it's the film's ending more than anything else. But there's a technological reveal at one point in the film's final act. Which, what did you think about that? Because when that happened, I couldn't help but think this feels like a random pull from both Inception and Josie and the Pussycats.
Yeah, you
It
mean
just
like when this film jumps the shark?
quite yeah, it jumps the shark.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's literally pulling from Inception in one way. And then I mentioned Josie
Yeah.
and the Pussycats because there's a technological thing in that
Yes.
movie, which is a weird comparison to make. But there's a reveal in that movie that it's like, wow, that's actually kind of
Yeah.
similar to what Dream Scenario is doing, isn't it? Okay,
Yeah.
it's just strange.
It is strange. And again, while it might have seeds of a good idea there,
Yeah,
it comes at a time where there's not enough for the film to really do much with it, other than to, again, in a very hollow way, show us what it's really there for.
it,
Right.
it,
And
fe-
it's to
it
take advantage of a moment in
that's yeah.
time and the whole pop culture angle of it.
Yeah, it's like what's the word? It's a catalyst. It's a mere device. It's a mere
Yeah.
device to trick the movie into getting to a conclusion that it hasn't earned. Like that's
Yep,
what it's doing.
I agree. Although we do get the uh the gag at the end, the talking heads.
Which I liked. I just wish there was more of a proper way to get there as opposed to what we
I
did
agree.
get, which like, the way we get there is a cheat. It's a cheat.
It is a cheat. I agree. I will give credit though to Nick Cage. I think he does his damnedest to keep this film compelling
Yeah.
when it starts to teeter a little bit.
Mhm.
He's genuinely very, very good here.
Yeah, actually, all the performances here are good. I actually love the performance of his wife,
Yeah,
Julianne
Julianne
Nicholson, playing
Nicholson
Janet.
is
I think
also
she's
great.
really good
Yeah,
too. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially, well, early on, I think it's great because she's as baffled as anyone because again, the film shows us that Paul is anything but unique. He's
yeah.
not interesting. Why is he showing up in people's dreams? He's
Mhm.
the most random guy in the world.
Yeah.
So, of course, that in and of itself is alarming. And then when
Mhm.
things start to get nightmarish, she understands the irony of that as well, because he isn't threatening, and she taps into that. Nicholson taps into that in a really great way. But then you start to see his ego really get the best of him. You start to see his insecurities get the best of him, and the conflict that arises. It makes sense, especially because it's not just Paul's life that's being affected; it's her life and her career. We see how she is on the verge of losing her job because of all of this as well.
Yeah,
but Paul isn't sensitive to that.
Yeah,
and so like that conflict again. I wish the film emphasized maybe a little bit more instead of again like. I feel like I'm being more negative here than I am positive.
It's still mostly felt because of the performance there. I get it and I can sense it. I don't feel enlightened by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. The film, it's interesting at times because of the performances, and you know the psychology it's aiming for is good. I just wish it was more seamless. Essentially what I'm trying to
with
say.
you. This is going to be one of those movies on Letterboxd that gets the solid 3 out of 5 for me, which is kind of like that's like the safety rating for me, right? And I feel like it is for you as well. It's like the safety way of saying, I liked it enough, but it doesn't take advantage of its premise nearly enough to really justify anything more than that.
I agree. I don't know if I have anything else to add.
No, I wish I liked this more. I do love this concept. I really do. I really wish I liked it more, though.
Yep, I agree. It's ultimately disappointing, but very high on Cage and Nicholson for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
They do their damnedest to make it work. And while the drama of it is compelling from a performative perspective, to emphasize something Brennan said earlier, there's some great humor here as well.
There is. Yeah. It is a funny movie.
And they get, from a performance perspective, they get that right.
I agree.
Film tonally might not, but they do.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right. Those are our thoughts on Dream Scenario. Let us know if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here. You can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Let us know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun jazz. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us there. It really helps out the show a ton. Is that it, Brendan? I think that's it.
I think so. And for those listening, if I do show up in your dreams, please let me know, unless your name is Tim Costa from the First Time Watchers, because I know you're already dreaming about me.
Yeah, Tim will for sure reach out. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, I know. He'll be the first one to reach out. I would bet money on that. If he listens to this podcast this far, he'll be the one to first reach out to me saying, "Hey, I dreamt about you."
Yeah, he definitely would. My last final thought on the film, actually, now that I'm looking at it here.
Okay.
I haven't read any reviews because, as I said, I came into this mostly blind. I haven't had time to actually do any research. So as part of that, I haven't read any reviews either.
Right.
But this has like a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. And we've talked before in the past about how that system is broken because fundamentally you could rate a movie like a B- and it's positive.
Yeah.
But if everybody did that, it's 92%. Is that the case here? Like, is everyone like mildly warm on this?
I think there is a lot of positivity for this one. Like,
I'm posing that as a question. I really don't know.
If we go to Metacritic, which is, I'm not saying it's a better way of gauging these reviews as an aggregator, but
that's a 74, I think.
That's a 74, which is actually a fairly high rating. Yeah, that's not bad. I'm not quite that high. Like a 74, that's like a 3.5 out of 5 kind of rating, right? Even borderline on a 4, at least getting close to that from a rounding standpoint.
But I guess that's kind of like what I mean. Like if you're a 3.5, or in our system like a B-, B-.
Yeah,
like that's not high. It's exactly what we said. We liked it. We liked the film enough.
Well, and I think I would have liked it more if I found more meaning in the film's ideas on stardom and celebrity as a result of this weird concept, which the film spends a lot of time with. If I found that more enlightening, and it sounds like some people did. So I'm really glad that they did. Yeah. If I were more interested in that side of the film, I would probably be a lot more positive on it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the film is thematically all that nuanced, and it's disjointed for the reasons we talked about.
No, I'm with you.
I just wonder if that 92% is a little inflated because of the system. I guess is the question that I'm asking.
Yeah.
Because you see 92% and you're like, man, that's really high. But what if 3/4 of those critics are like, yeah, it's like a B-.
I mean, yeah, well, because of that broken system, as you talked about, if a movie gets 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, I don't see that as a big deal anymore. I really don't.
It is different. Anyway, I'm not saying that as a bad thing, just posing a question, that's all.
Yeah.
At any rate, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, love a good Nick Cage.
JD, I'll see you in my dreams.